On the surface, he was a father, a businessman, and a respected member of his community. But underneath all that, he was one of the most meticulous and terrifying serial killers in American history. Today, we're dissecting the chilling case of Israel Keyes.
So, how does a person do that? How do you live this completely normal life on the outside while hiding secrets that are just monstrous? This is the central question that absolutely baffled the FBI, and it's really at the heart of the whole Israel Keyes story. So let's get into it and try to figure out how he pulled it off.
All right, first up, the killer next door. So to everyone who knew him, Israel Keyes was just normal. He was this quiet, unassuming guy living up in Alaska. He had his own construction business, he was a dad, he was the kind of person you'd never, ever look at twice.
And that, right there, was his perfect cover. I mean, look at this. On one hand, you have the public man, hardworking tradesman, devoted father, quiet soldier. The guy everyone saw. But behind that mask was something else entirely. A meticulous planner, a sadistic hunter, a serial killer. And he managed to operate completely undetected for more than a decade.
Okay, so where does this kind of darkness even come from? How does someone become a predator like this? Well, for Keyes, this journey started way before his first crime. It really began in his childhood, which was, let's just say, it was marked by some pretty intense isolation and extremist beliefs. Looking at his early life, you can really see the seeds being planted. He was born into this big fundamentalist family, raised way out in rural Washington with no electricity, no running water, total isolation. Then, as a teen, he gets kicked out of his church community and kind of drifts into some darker stuff. His time in the army, though, that's where he really honed his skills. He learned discipline, planning, tactical thinking, all tools that, he would later twist for his own horrific purposes.
And when you look closer, the warning signs were all there, right from the beginning. A fascination with guns, cruelty to animals, a real obsession with controlling other people. Total lack of empathy. This wasn't a case of someone just suddenly snapping one day. No way. This was a slow, deliberate descent into violence. Every single one of these behaviors was another step on the path to becoming the predator he was.
So this brings us to his method. And honestly, this is what set Israel Keyes completely apart. It's what made him an absolute nightmare for law enforcement. See, most serial killers, they have a type, right? A specific kind of victim, or they operate in one area. Not Keyes. He was random, he was patient, and he left zero patterns. He was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. And his level of premeditation, it was just astounding. Get this, he created what he called murder kits. These were caches with weapons, restraints, tools, the whole shebang. And he would bury them in remote spots all over the country. Then he'd just wait, sometimes for years before he'd go back to that spot to hunt. This wasn't impulsive. This was a long-term, carefully planned project.
And he had a system, a chillingly logical 5-step process for getting away with murder. First, he'd prepare by burying those murder kits. Then, he'd travel, fly to a city, rent a car, pay for everything in cash to leave no trail. Step 3, select a victim based on pure opportunity, not a type. Then, abduct them, often taking them across state lines to confuse jurisdiction. And finally, eliminate them in a calculated, detached way, leaving zero forensic evidence behind. Every single step was designed to create a series of totally disconnected crimes that would be impossible for police to link together.
And for more than 10 years, this system was flawless. He really was a ghost. But then, with his final victim, he made one single, uncharacteristic mistake. Just a moment of sloppiness, really. And that one error is what brought his entire reign of terror to an end. So what was that mistake? After he abducted and killed 18-year-old Samantha Coney in Anchorage, Keyes broke his own #1 rule: never leave a financial trail. For some reason, he started using her debit card at ATMs. And that one decision, well, it would unravel absolutely everything. You can see how fast it all fell apart here. February 1st, 2012, Samantha Coney is taken. For the next month, Keyes is using her debit card across Alaska, Arizona, New Mexico, leaving a breadcrumb trail. And by March 13th, he's arrested at a gas station in Texas. Why? Because police identified his rental car from ATM surveillance footage. And just like that, years of meticulous planning gone. The one thing he was so careful to avoid, a digital trail, is exactly what led police right to him. All right, so now Keyes is in custody.
and the FBI begins these incredibly intense interrogations. It didn't take them long to realize they hadn't just caught a murderer. Oh no, they had caught a predator unlike anyone they had ever encountered before.
So how many people did he kill? He confessed to at least 11 murders, but, and this is a huge but, that number is really just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators are certain the real number is much, much higher. You see, Keyes only admitted to the crimes he knew they could prove. He spent the rest of his time just taunting them, dropping hints about many more victims whose names, well, he took those to his grave.
And this quote from the FBI files, man, it reveals everything about his mindset. He called himself a hunter. He described murder as a carefully planned expedition, not some impulsive act. Think about that. He felt zero remorse, no guilt. For Israel Keyes, murder wasn't about rage or passion. It was a hobby. It was an adventure that gave him the ultimate sense of power and control.
So the interrogations turned into this really disturbing game of cat and mouse. He'd confessed to the murders of Bill and Lorraine Currier in Vermont. He'd admit that he studied other serial killers just so he could learn from their mistakes. He explained how he intentionally picked victims in different states to make things harder for police. But he was always taunting them, holding back names, holding back locations. He was always holding the cards, and you could tell he just loved having that power.
But if you're hoping for a neat resolution to this story, you're not going to get one. There's no big courtroom finale where justice is served for all his victims, because Israel Keyes made sure that many of his darkest secrets would die right along with him.
On December 2nd, 2012, Israel Keyes took his own life in his jail cell in Anchorage. It was his final act of control. He left behind this bizarre, rambling suicide note, but it offered no new names, no answers, no closure for the families of his unknown victims. He ended the investigation completely on his own terms.
You know, ultimately, the Israel Keyes case was a real game changer for law enforcement. He's this haunting example of how a person can live a totally ordinary life on the surface while hiding this extraordinary capacity for evil. He proved that a killer doesn't need a type. They don't need a signature. They can operate in the shadows for years, defying every single profile and living right next door to you.
And so we're left with this one final, haunting question. How many more victims are still out there? That's the question Israel Keyes left behind. It's a really chilling reminder that the true number of people he killed, well, it may never be known. He left a legacy of silence and just so many unanswered questions.